How fast? The realization hit Owen like a truck as he looked at Ryuk, who was now before him. Fear gripped him from the suddenness, but he forcefully reined it down. He tried to scream, but the words died in his throat when Ryuk extended a hand and flicked a single finger into the center of his Adam's apple. Spittle came flying out as Owen was forced a few steps backwards, but he came shooting forward again, swiftly slashing his sickle toward Ryuk's neck. The sound of iron clashing rang out. Owen felt his weapon connect with something, and he maintained his slashing motion until something felt off. His eyes widened in shock as he slowly stood upright. He looked at his weapon and found its edge had shattered. Cracks ran down what remained in his hands. Then, trickle, he felt liquid pouring down his face. Raising his hand, he touched near his eyes and realized it wasn't just blood. It was the broken edge of his weapon, buried deep into his eye socket. The realization fractured something inside him. Pain diffused slowly through his senses, but what truly gave him a taste of true pain was what followed. Two white-scaled fingers appeared before his face. They gripped the embedded blade and yanked it out in one swift motion. Blood erupted from the socket. He screamed, but the scream died in his throat when he felt the same blade, once lodged in his eye, flash across his throat, cleanly severing it. A spray of blood once more burst into the void. Owen stumbled backward, 3 unconscious steps before his legs hit a platform behind him, and he collapsed hard onto his back. His lips tried to move, but only the gurgling of blood filled the air. Ah! His nose flared, trying to draw air, but it felt like the entire world had been drained of oxygen. This is how I die. The realization hit him as his one remaining eyeball rolled in its socket. He saw him. The young man covered in white scales stepped forward slowly. Ryuk crouched beside Owen's head, lowering himself. One hand extended, hovering right above Owen's face. A faint gleam of light flickered before Owen's eyes as his trembling hands reached forward, because in Ryuk's hand was another vial. The same one Owen had once taken, filled with potent life force. If he had that, if he could just reach it, he could live. But the motion to raise his hands happened only in his mind. His body remained paralyzed. Red tears streamed from his eyes as life left him, even though what could save him lay just a couple of inches from his nose. A creeping silence, but it brought about one realization over to Owen. One that brought a smile to his lips. A strange, unexplainable smile. The memories came flashing back. Him stabbing Ryuk in the eye, slowly cleaving open his throat, and then dangling the life vial before his face. And now here he was, lying on this platform, one of his eyes gouged out, and blood oozing from the cut in his throat. And to top it all off, a vial now dangled right before his face, too. The same scene perfectly recreated, but this time with one major difference. Him, the young man with the overconfident ego, had somehow managed to save his own life. But he, powerless, couldn't even lift his hands, and there was no companion left to call upon, neither the strength to fight. Was I the one who underestimated him? Owen wondered, his thoughts unraveling chaotically yet becoming clearer than ever. No, I never underestimated him. I always knew he was a monster. I feared him and I respected his strength. I saw an opening, an opportunity where this monster seemed wounded and vulnerable, like he was one step from the grave. And I took that opportunity because I thought that was the closest chance I'd ever get to escape this nightmare. It wasn't underestimation at all. Instead, it was a desperate gamble. And I lost. Now I understand him so clearly, Owen thought, as his eyeballs moved, blinking once to look at Ryuk, whose face slowly blurred out. Even when he was just one step away from death, I still failed to kill him. The difference in our strength was wider than I calculated. I knew the monster was strong, but I failed to truly understand just how monstrous he really was. Those were his final thoughts before the last flicker of his life aura faded. Ryuk watched as the final bit of light slowly died from Owen's eye. He stopped dangling the vial before his face and called, "A Bliver!" The figure had already appeared before him. "Feed this to the unconscious girl," Ryuk instructed, passing the vial to a Bliver, who bowed and disappeared. And then, Ryuk sat down on top of the levitating platform beside Owen's corpse, his gaze drifting into the distance. Owen's blood kept flowing, and soon it reached him, painting his body in a dark, sticky red. But Ryuk didn't flinch or try to avoid it. He remained still and silent. On his face he held a truly bizarre expression, the expression of melancholy and remorse. Right now he felt an unfamiliar emotion. The only time he'd felt something even remotely close was when Uncle Bob had turned to ashes. The one thing in his life he genuinely cared about, yet couldn't save. But back then, he'd been more furious at his own weakness. But now it was something else. This emotion, pity. Pity for the little chess piece he'd overlooked. The one who had, for a moment, flipped the board against him. Even though Ryuk had reversed it again and eventually gained the upper hand, he still felt it, sadness. Today, Ryuk learned truths. Truths he'd never learned from Zarkul, nor from that monster of a woman, even with their overwhelming power. And those truths would stay with him, even until his final moments. He would never forget the nameless assassin whose corpse currently rested by his side. Host's Hurricane to body sync has increased from 70% to 99%. Hurricane energy points have grown from 10,000 to 20,000. Host Hurricane grows stronger. The system notification flashed before Ryuk's eyes, pulling him out of his reverie. He stared silently at the panel for a while, before a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. The spirit was right. Battle truly is the fastest way to progress hurricane cultivation. He had fought for less than 5 minutes, yet his hurricane energy points had doubled, and his hurricane to body sync had almost reached 100%. It was a clear improvement in something he had no idea how even to improve just a few hours ago. Although, to be fair, it was also one of the hardest battles of his life, even though it happened in less than 5 minutes, so it didn't come that easy. His gaze slowly drifted toward Owen's corpse. Why did you even decide to keep him alive in the first place? Why didn't you just kill him off along with his mates? The system asked in confusion. Ryuk hummed slightly before replying. I wanted to learn more about the strange power one of his mates used. Strange power. That second Apocrypha stage assassin used a powerful occult ability that trapped both Princess Elfie and me inside a card-based world, filled with monsters below. That realm wasn't illusory, it was hauntingly real. And what's more, there was no trace of apex or abyssal energy in that realm. It held a bizarre aura, felt like magic, dark magic, and that drew my interest. I hoped I could question him about the power, and perhaps the occult organization he belonged to as well. But I guess that curiosity almost killed me, Ryuk muttered as he reached for Owen's neck. Hanging around it was a simple, dark-colored necklace. When Ryuk took it and placed it in his palm, he noticed the tattoos on his arms subtly shift to black. This chain holds a significant amount of abyssal energy, he thought. His second hand reached out. With abyssal energy surging to his fingertips, he pressed it against Owen's chest and watched as the body slowly turned to ashes, dispersing into the void. Soon, all trace of Owen was gone, except for the dark chain, which Ryuk wrapped around his wrist. Good. I can now adapt to energy through non-living materials, Ryuk thought, eyeing the chain now coiled like a serpent on his arm. I've realized a new truth. What is it? If Hurricane allows me to adapt to energy forms, then I don't need to risk touching opponents during battle. Instead, I can use objects like this. Chains, rings, artifacts filled with different energy. If I wear them, I'll adapt to their energy and unlock techniques related to them. It's far safer and more effective than relying on physical contact, as once opponents realize I need a touch, they will stop falling for that trick altogether. That makes sense. Also, I've noticed I can vividly remember what my techniques feel like when I'm under pressure, when my heart is pounding, when I'm on my last leg. Is that why you were able to easily shift into the null transformation and even use one of its techniques? Exactly. At that time, I didn't stop to think about what it meant to be a null. All I had was a plan. Touch her, copy her abyssal energy, shift into a null, grab Orlith off her hands, and escape into the void rift. I wasn't worried about whether I could become a null again. For a moment, I fully believed I was one. Like I'd never lost the null bloodline in the first place. In that delusional state, I pulled off the transformation in a blink and used the ability without hesitation. Only under pressure, when I delude myself into believing I am what I need to be, do I truly awaken the skill. But if I'm sitting cross-legged and calmly trying to activate it, I'll remember I'm not a null anymore, and that makes things 10 times harder. Ryuk looked down at his hands, the tattoos flickering between dark and purple, and his eyes gleamed with deeper realization. The key to hurricane power is delusion, Ryuk muttered aloud. There's no need to think about what it's like to be a null. I am a null. I am a jade dragon. I am a void king. I am an ice king. This is the path to hurricane's true power. There's no such thing as imitating a technique like I previously thought. That was a wrong approach. To believe without doubt that you're what you wish to be is the key to hurricane. His eyes flickered with mad resolve, a knowing delusion. And yet, it worked. The chain coiled in his hand began to ooze with ingrained abyssal energy. In a flash, Ryuk's form shifted, growing, changing, and soon enough, he stood as a hulking, 7-meter-tall devil, a flickering red thorny tail trailing behind him like a living whip. The shift made his mouth turn into an ear-reaching maw, and a grin broke across it. I understand this power now, he said, but all that came out was a growl. The sound of coughing rang through the void, and Ryuk paused. In a blink, he returned to his human form, catching his breath. He moved the chain from his palm and wrapped it tightly around his wrist. Surprisingly, it didn't feel out of place. More like a simple dark chain hung around his wrist. He stepped forward and arrived on the platform where they all surrounded her. The armored beings who had appeared during the final moments of battle were, of course, his Nexus Legion. The last time Ryuk had called on them was during the war with Zarkul. But he'd never forgotten them. The Nexus Legion wasn't tied to any of his bloodlines. It was a pact like the Void Azura Pact and hence was never lost after he lost his bloodlines. They had always been there, waiting and ready. And when he summoned them again, they came instantly to his aid, saving him from a precarious situation. His gaze moved from them to look at her, lying on the platform, coughing a couple of times before she snapped open her eyes. Where am I? Orlith muttered under her breath, feeling a pounding headache that gave her the illusion of her brain pumping within her skull. The world was blurry at first, but she could feel a strange force coursing through her veins, gradually clearing her head and making her feel better. When she opened her eyes, she met with the scene of weirdly armored beings surrounding her. What are they? She thought, shocked to the point of being unable to move, especially when the scene of how she had died came rushing back into her head. Where am I? She asked once more, this time louder, and the reply came, echoing firmly through the void. Welcome to hell, you cold sinner. A pang echoed in her heart from those words as she raised up her head to where the voice came. But her fear quickly faded when she saw who had spoken. A hovering, handsome young man, who held a mocking smirk on his face, though he was seemingly trying to hide it behind a disdainful expression. Wait, you died too? She asked, and watched as his expression pummeled to the grave. What the hell? Hey, if I die, I'm going to heaven, not hell. Ryuk barked out as Orlith rose to her feet. She glanced at the armored beings again. When they continued to stare blankly, offering no threat, she turned her attention back to Ryuk, her cold demeanor slowly returning. What happened? We lost, Ryuk replied, this time seriously. She was too strong. And now, we're hiding away in a pocket of space, he said, as she eyed the surrounding void, before pausing on the Nexus Legion. And they are? She asked. Those are one of mine, Ryuk replied as she turned to her clothing. Her armor was in terrible shape, cracked, torn and barely clinging to her body. The sight of them made the memories return vividly. The memory of her fighting that Nihil woman. She had exchanged a total of 9 moves with her, in literal seconds, and the 10th move was enough to send her collapsing onto the ground, losing consciousness immediately. She's strong. Overwhelmingly strong, she muttered in realization. Something Ryuk couldn't deny. But beyond that, she also examined her skin and noticed there were no marks or burns. Something she remembered had appeared on her before. Her wounds had closed up, and there was no internal bleeding either, something that had caused her to collapse in the first place. Clenching and unclenching her fists, she could feel her strength returning. It all led to the question. She had collapsed and should have been killed. Yet here she was, standing alive with no marks or injuries, and full strength once more. How had she escaped certain death? "You saved me," she whispered, turning to look at Ryuk. "Why?" she asked, and noticed as his focused expression changed into a mischievous one. Well, what type of man wouldn't save a damsel in distress? But Orlith wasn't going to fall for that, and he could see that, judging from her blank, cold stare that was still waiting for a proper answer. "Okay, fine. This is why I saved you," Ryuk began. "Firstly, this place we're hiding in is a simple realm that shields us away from the chaos of the outside world. But the catch is, the entrance to the door will always be present where we opened it in the first place, and that place is still in that world. So, if I am to open the gate to leave here, we will both be landing right back in her realm. I'm guessing she knows this too, so she might even be waiting for us to step out," he explained. But he didn't need to explain more before Orlith pieced things together. "So, you saved me because you realized you'll eventually have to fight her again, and 2 of us should fight her than just 1? She asked as Ryuk hummed. "And also maybe because you realize you have no way out, and we're hoping I have something that can get us out of this realm, hopefully?" she added. "No. I was hoping you would have something, some artifacts that can help us both fight and kill her. Something stronger than divine-grade weapons," Ryuk said. Truthfully, it was why he had saved her. If he fought that Nihil woman alone, his chances of winning were nil. It would be better if he fought her along with someone who was equally as strong as he. So it was just as she said, better for 2 than 1. But more importantly, he had hoped she would have useful weapons, just like the scythe, but of higher grade, since she seemed to have an unending array of artifacts after all. Saving her wasn't a noble act from his side. But if he wanted to survive, she had to be part of the equation. "Thank you for saving my life." The words echoed out through the void, as Ryuk slowly turned his gaze upwards to see her bowing her head. "I thought I just told you. I didn't do it for you," he said, his brow lifting in surprise as Orlith rose upright. "Truly, you didn't do it for me, but for yourself. But the truth is, you at least gave me a second chance at life." "I'm grateful for that," she said, and he could only smile wryly at that. "So, do you have a plan?" she asked, and Ryuk nodded. "Yes." "What is it?" "It's simple. We can't stay here forever, so we'll eventually have to step out of here and leave. Leaving will mean fighting her. So we need a plan to fight her and win. To get any momentary power gain in such a quick time, we'll need new and more powerful artifacts that can significantly improve individual strength." Ryuk concluded the amazing plan he had in his head. "So," Orlith said, "your plan is for us to fight a nullity stage being? And not just any ordinary nullity stage being, but one from the legendary Nihil Devil race, who is at the nullity stage? And also almost got us both killed in a matter of mere minutes, just a moment ago?" The question made Ryuk's eyebrow furrow. When he had reviewed the plan in his head, it sounded so solid. But when she had asked him, it made him look dumb instead. "Well, everything sounds dumb when you ask the question like that," he said, to which she replied with a matter-of-factly, "No, your plan is indeed dumb." "Well, you got a better plan, Miss Smart?" he retorted, as she scoffed in pride. "Of course I do. One much better than returning to what almost killed us," she added, reaching her palm outward. Just a moment later, and 4 artifacts appeared, floating in the void. One was a brush, the others were 3 types of liquid, one black, one white, and the last golden, held in cone-shaped glass containers. Apart from the brush, Ryuk couldn't say he exactly knew much about any of them. I can open a portal back to Amamura by drawing a resummon ritual, which the royal elders in the palace can sense and use to open a gate for us to return, she explained, something that made Ryuk's heart beat faster. A way back to Amamura? Was that why she was so confident in coming here in the first place? Because she knew she could always open a portal back. He thought. What's the catch? He asked, as her eyebrow knit for a while before she eventually replied. This technique of mine is rarely used. And the last time it was used, the one who came back to the palace brought with him a person who at first looked like a friend, but in the end was an enemy that dealt the family quite the damage. Ever since then, there's been a rule. No one is allowed to bring back any other person, she explained, but continued before he could utter a reply. I will be bringing you with me, though, since you also saved my life, she said. Oh, really? That's so sweet, except that I don't know what will happen to me when you break the rule, he replied pessimistically, and she shrugged. I don't know. Maybe you'll be imprisoned a couple of months or so. Once I convince them that you saved me from certain death, which I will do by showing them this armor. The armor? Ryuk asked. Yes. They know how strong it is, and they know someone like you can't hope to put a dent in it. That'll prove I really was in a precarious situation, and if I say you saved me, then they can be more lenient, shortening your sentence to just about a month. She explained it flatly, like it was just another fact. But Ryuk wasn't having it at all. 1 month imprisonment at least? That truly sounds like a good plan, he said, as Orlith turned to look at him. Well, is your plan of dying any better? Ha! We get to live here and go back to Amamura, and even though you might be imprisoned for a month or 2, there's still a 100% chance of not dying, at least. She explained. No matter how many weapons or artifacts we wear, our chances of surviving in a battle against that monster aren't close to 20%. Talk less of 50% or 100%. I don't know if you noticed or not, but she wasn't going all out. She was messing with us and finished us in seconds, all with nothing but claws and kicks, while grinning in amusement. What will happen if she grabs a real weapon? Or gets serious? We'll both die in a blink, she concluded, something Ryuk couldn't refute. So, which is smarter to you? 1 month imprisonment or certain death? The panel flashed after. Her plan makes more sense. What? Ryuk thought in disbelief. I'm not saying it makes sense for you to get imprisoned, since your imprisonment won't be simple. You will most likely have every one of your moves watched by her royal family, even after being freed, or being given strict orders on who you're allowed to meet and who you aren't, to safeguard their secrets or something. Royal issues are nothing but a headache. I agree, Ryuk said, nodding internally. But a headache is better compared to death, Ryuk. That Nihil woman isn't going all out and seemed to be playing with both of you. She could have killed Orlith, but she simply grabbed her by the head and dragged her unconscious body everywhere while she destroyed you. If she wanted her gone, she would have done it since, and sad to say, but you're not that much better yourself, Ryuk. 3 simple strikes and your endurance came down to 0. If she gets serious, I'm guessing 1 strike from her should be enough to kill you. If you have a choice to pick between a royal headache or certain death, I'm thinking a royal headache is much smarter. The system explained lengthily, as Ryuk hummed, silently turning away, to the sight of Orlith already opening the cubes and drawing an image in the void with the brush. Her eyebrows were knitted in focus as she continued, slowly drafting out the image. So, I have to run, huh? Ryuk thought silently to himself. It's not running. It's a temporary retreat, just like you did before, when you came to this place. The quest doesn't have a time limit, so it will always be available. Now that your comprehension of the hurricane energy has increased, you can quickly improve your cultivation. And when you're strong enough, you can complete the quest. The system convinced, and Ryuk silently hummed. That really was a logical plan. Silently, Orlith continued drawing, and just 30 minutes later, she had drawn a runic image into the air, and soon enough, an absorption force began to bloom. An hour later, and the absorption force became incredibly powerful. She stepped back, a small smile of relief blooming on her lips. Before her was a vortex of white and white, along with dots of gold at its center. The elders have received the signal and opened the gate. We can go in now, she said, turning to Ryuk, who floated down the platform. You sure this goes back to the place, to your royal castle? He asked, and she nodded. Yes, the golden dots of light are my family's vortex signature. If we step in, we land back in the castle, she said, as Ryuk nodded before he added mischievously. Well then, ladies first, he said, with a princely bow and his hands stretched out toward the vortex. You have some serious trust issues, don't you? She said, with an obvious expression as she slowly stepped into the portal. She didn't completely disappear immediately, but was slowly fading, and she turned back to Ryuk. So, you coming or what? She asked. But shock covered her expression when she watched Ryuk's mischievous look fade into one of serious focus and conviction. A 180-degree change to his previous expression. What? What are you doing? She screamed. Goodbye, Orlith, Ryuk said. No. Wait. Have you gone insane? You'll die if you face her, she screamed in anger, as she threw her hand outwards to grab him, but failed. The portal spun faster, and moments later, she was forcefully dragged and disappeared. Now all that was left in the void was Ryuk, and his Nexus Legion hanging around him. You decided to stay back in the end. The system blinked after the conjured vortex by Orlith finally dispersed, leaving the void in silence. Ryuk stared at the space silently for a while before a smile of relief bloomed on his face. That was a harder decision than I thought. To be honest, he had been deeply conflicted. The door to the outside world was right before him. Imprisonment for 1 month? He never cared for that, as he was more than confident that he could slip away unnoticed and disappear without a trace. But even though he had every reason to leave, that decision never brought him peace. A part of him felt that the decision to retreat, although logical, wasn't necessarily the best. But making an illogical choice, especially for someone like him who believed himself to be a survivor, was incredibly difficult. If battle truly is the way to growth, why ever run from it? He asked the system aloud. You're not running, you're retreating, for the one whom you are to fight is way above your league. And that will only boost the rate of growth even faster, he answered as he silently steeled his mind. A moment later, a slice opened in the void before him, and Ryuk stepped through, followed by 11 of the strongest members of his Nexus Legion. Just as he suspected, stepping through the portal brought him back to the abyssal battlefield, right where he'd left. And there she was. Exactly 50 meters away, she sat calmly on the ground, one hand resting on her knee, her ever-present grin aimed straight at him. When Ryuk stepped out, his second hand moved to the side, and the Frost Grimoire immediately materialized in his palm. Now, his left hand held the grimoire while his right held the abyssal energy-bound chains. I sensed the girl's presence disappear, she said as she slowly stood. Yet, the simple act of standing unleashed a terrifying aura that rippled outward, enveloping the space in an oppressive grip. Don't tell me. She left you behind? With every step she took, the entire abyss trembled. Ho! A deep exhale left Ryuk's lips. Fear and horror. He had never felt so much fear and horror in his life, but in the next moment. Go! He commanded the Nexus Legion as they charged forward instantly. He didn't wait for the result, as he already knew what fate awaited them. But those few seconds were all he needed to begin. Ryuk gripped the abyssal chains tightly, and once more, his body expanded, reaching the hulking 7-meter null form. But that wasn't all. Opening his wide, monstrous maw, he raised the Frost Grimoire over it and swallowed it whole. What the hell? What are you even doing? The system screamed in confusion. Trying to use 2 elements at once, Ryuk answered, feeling the biting cold that began to ooze from deep within. But you haven't reached that stage of using two elements simultaneously yet. The second will always chase away the first. Ryuk grinned. True. But that only happens when both forces are external. I held the grimoire, and my tattoos channeled frost. Then I picked up the chains. The frost vanished, leaving only the abyss. But what if I swallowed the frost instead and held the chains externally? One touch from within, one from outside. Aren't you interested in what happens next? The instant he completed that thought, one of Ryuk's crimson eyes suddenly turned a sharp, icy white. He could feel the cold flowing outward, freezing everything, including his own heart. Slowly, the frost grimoire was causing a transformation. But he endured. The ground beneath him iced over, the temperature plummeting by thousands of degrees. His eyebrows turned white, frost forming thin cracks across his skin. The pain was excruciating, but Ryuk found something within it. Even though he was freezing to death from the inside, and the frost surged wildly within him, his null form remained active, a sign that he still held control over the abyssal energy. The ice energy is too much for you to control. You'll be frozen to death if this continues. The system flashed a red warning, but all he got was an insane smirk. Oh, system. What happened to your faith in me? It was a sound impossible to ignore. Ha! A surprised gasp slipped from the Nihil woman's lips, who had the Nexus Legion's commanders appear right before her. In response, she slashed forward once, and with that simple motion, all 11 members of the Nexus Legion, including General Obliver, were instantly erased. But it wasn't unexpected. Even Ryuk, who stood at the Exigna stage in his Beyonder Dragon form, had fallen in less than 3 moves before. What hope did the others who were at cultivation stages or 2 lower have? Still, her attention was forcibly drawn elsewhere, to the mysterious ripple that surged with terrifying pressure. Her gaze returned to Ryuk, and under her focused stare, she witnessed something far beyond what she expected. A bizarre energy surging from a single source, his heart. His 7-meter null form began to grow again under her disbelieving gaze. It expanded and expanded until it became a towering 60-meter colossus. His humanoid frame warped into something far more beastly. 2 massive, 30-meter wings burst from his back, crystallized in ice and dark abyssal runes. His hands twisted into claws the size of mountains, tearing into the ground for support. His spine stretched down into a gigantic, frost-covered tail, 50 meters in length, whipping behind like a living weapon. He had transformed from a null into a fusion of frost draconic and demonic monstrosity. You activated the Frostborn Calamity Dragon transformation skill? The system panel flashed in shock, as it instantly recognized the skill. A hurricane of frost burst from Ryuk's beastly maw, which widened further in anticipation. He clenched his claws, feeling them pulsing with raw elemental power. So much power! He whispered to himself, basking in the familiar rush. Now, activate Beyonder Dragon. Activate Beyonder Dragon. Ryuk ordered, but what he saw next left him stunned. Error. Activation skill has been blocked by source power. Skill cannot be activated. What? The scream was so loud. Even the Nihil woman turned to him in confusion. Ryuk couldn't believe his eyes. His Beyonder Dragon skill was refusing to activate. And it just had to be now of all time? But then, he sensed something and turned to the side. Hovering beside his head, wrapped in delicate white draconic scales, was none other than her, the manifestation of his Beyonder Dragon bloodline. Despite her figure being no larger than a butterfly, her presence in the physical world shook Ryuk's heart. "What are you?" he tried to say, but stopped when she turned to face the Nihil woman. Her gaze was calm, like a placid lake. No fear, no respect, not even caution. Then she turned back to Ryuk. "You are afraid and scared. Your heart, though thundering with power, is full of horror. You're sweating, though it looks like mist because of the cold. You're petrified," she said plainly, and Ryuk couldn't deny it. He was scared, terrified even. But you still stayed to fight. Even when you had the chance to run with your tail between your legs. You still chose to face her head-on? That looks foolish. And I know you, Ryuk. You're someone who thinks. He's smart. The kind of coward who would run at the first sign of danger, the moment logic deemed it the right move. Your actions now contradict everything I've recorded about you. So I'm here to ask, what changed? But then, the sound of footsteps resumed, coming from the Nihil woman, each step like thunder rolling through the abyss. Don't you think this is quite the bad timing for a chat? Ryuk asked, mist rising off him as the sweat poured out harder. She hummed quietly in thought. I guess it doesn't matter why you stopped being a coward. What matters is you did. You went against your own beliefs, hence breaking free from the script I wrote for you. And in doing so, you exceeded my expectations and gained a little of my respect. As she spoke, she floated closer to Ryuk. In return, then it's only fair to give you one of what is being deprived of you. Ryuk's draconic head unconsciously leaned back from her, closing in on him. But it didn't go far before her tiny hands landed right on his forehead. Ryuk watched, eyes locked on her as her eyes slowly closed, and the world mirrored her action, also going silent. Behind him, the Nihil woman had stopped mid-step as if stuck in time. The breeze stilled, the abyss remaining motionless. A brilliant flash exploded through the abyss. Ryuk's eyes widened as he beheld her eyes, now open, glistening with countless interlocking symbols, like celestial gears that should never have been set in motion. And then she spoke, a single word that echoed through his soul. Awaken. The second she spoke it, Ryuk's colossal form jerked back violently. It wasn't a conscious movement, but every cell in his body screaming in panic, recognizing an imminent threat powerful enough to override his conscious will. But he couldn't retreat far. His body halted midair as a torrent of white blood erupted from Ryuk's maw. She hovered in the same position, but her outstretched hands now had their fingers slowly folding together. And the closer her palm drew in, the tighter the sensation grew. The feeling of his heart being crushed. Then she began her incantation, words that echoed deep in his soul. Awaken, O light unblessed, sealed in the marrow of dragons long erased, by the right of soul and trials endured. Reveal thyself in the vessel who holds the bloodline. Open the first of the divine seals slumbering in blood. The moment those words were spoken, this time it wasn't blood. He had already flooded the ground beneath him with it. No, this was something else. His heart. It had been crushed, reduced to pulp, and ended him. But the familiar darkness never came in. Instead, all he saw was the birth of white flames, blooming in every direction. The darkness of the abyss receded, giving way to a realm of blazing light. And from the depth of that luminous white, Ryuk saw it, a single gem of pure white flame, glowing at the center of it all, etched with a sigil that pulsed with ancient power. And beside it, a beating piece of flesh, his heart. He watched like an outsider as the gem dissolved into the heart and it began to pulse once more. And then ignite. White flames burst out from within, replacing the deep red and shadowy hue of before. His heart now burned with divine fire. It beat louder and louder, sending devastating arcs of energy that slowly tore apart the realm around him. And even as his conscious mind dissolved, all he could see was the sight of his heart turning white and burning in divine flames. In the real world, a pair of gigantic eyes burst open, unleashing a destructive arc of energy that tore through the abyss. Ryuk shot straight into the sky, shattering the frozen garden beneath him. He reached the crimson clouds that veiled the world above, and then, a bestial, primal roar ripped through the heavens. It wasn't just a scream. It was an instinct that, if never released, would have destroyed it from the inside. Unprecedented waves of power surged through his being, the source of it being none other than his heart, which pounded harder than he had ever imagined possible. And when he gained full clarity over his consciousness, the panel flashed. Congratulations to host on awakening the first sigil of the Beyonder Dragon. The sigil of... the sigil of white flames. How did he get up there so fast? The Nihil woman murmured, her forward-leaning body rising upright as she looked into the sky. She had been ready to surge toward him when, in an instant, he had zoomed upward, so fast that for a moment, her eyes could barely follow. High above, she saw him, in the same colossal white-crimson-scaled draconic form. But something had changed. Ripples of energy surged from his chest, and white flames burned across his body. Most prominent were his eyes, which billowed with divine white light. Ryuk turned his attention from his transformation to the imminent threat looming below. He could see it in her eyes' impatience. Without wasting another second, he moved. His gigantic maw parted slowly, opening wide, and from within, something began to brew. A colossal sphere of energy surged forth from his throat. But to say it brewed might be inaccurate. The sphere was already fully formed a moment later, the size of a hulking fortress. Space cracked into nothing as Ryuk's draconic head jerked forward. Then, the sphere roared outward with overwhelming force. Space along the ball's path didn't just shatter. It bent violently, forced to curve around the oncoming fury. Ryuk noticed a difference. On the surface of the ball were bizarre white flames. But unlike frost or abyssal energy, they radiated something else entirely. Something divine. The gigantic ball of energy consumed the entire sky before the Nihil woman. But only a mocking sneer played on her lips. A second later, she crouched, then launched herself forward, becoming a beam of dark light that pierced cleanly through the massive energy sphere. Her claw drew to the side, a powerful billow of abyssal energy dancing along its edges as it widened to a span of over a meter. Violently coiling her body backward, she flashed before the sphere, and then, the sound of something being torn apart echoed in the void. With her claws before her, she tore straight through the entire ball of energy, cleanly splitting it in half, as it exploded with a loud bang a moment later. As she surged out from the remnants of the explosion, her eyes narrowed, and a moment later, she twisted and quickly slashed her claw to the side, but met with nothing. A louder sound thundered in the air as a claw blasted out from below her. She reacted instantly, crossing both arms, but it was too late. Her head jerked upward violently as Ryuk's colossal claw slammed against her jaw. A stream of blood trickled from her nose and sprayed into the air. Yet even with her head recoiled, her claws moved, slashing towards Ryuk in return. But he predicted it, flashing to the side, to dodge while slamming out his tail that lunged like a whip, appearing right before her widened eyes. Kaboom! Another devastating explosion followed, the ground once more reduced to a giant cratered abyss. Ryuk remained suspended in the air, but not for long. His image flickered and then dissolved into pure white flame energy, scattering into the wind. Right as he appeared in the depth of the abyss, a dark silhouette flashed bright before his eyes, and then, space was slashed into nothing as a claw slashed upwards to Ryuk's jaw. But he dodged, jerking his colossal dragon head back. In response, his limbs slashed downward with tremendous force. The blow was stopped dead in its tracks by her abyssal claw. Space cracked violently as their claws clashed, yet neither gave an inch, eventually forming a black hole between them. "You've grown stronger," her voice rang out, laced with amusement. Ryuk opened his maw, surging frost and flames coming together to form a destructive sphere, which he prepared to unleash, but she reacted fast. Too fast. Her other claw reached into his maw and slammed against the destructive ball of energy. Kaboom! It exploded an inch out of Ryuk's maw, the resulting explosion powerful enough to send both figures crashing through opposite ends of the abyss, colliding into walls of ancient stone. Moments later, two beams of light, one white, one dark, pierced the darkness, colliding at the center of the abyss, followed by boom! Explosions erupted one after another, hundreds in mere fractions of a second, ripping the abyssal ground farther and farther apart until they were no ground anymore, all of it having been erased. Yet the explosions never ceased, only growing louder and more relentless. Ryuk's roar blasted from the depths of his throat, flames of pure white surging across his colossal form as he cleaved forward with power. But even after, a dark flash of light slashed past him, and then the sound of slicing air echoed, followed by a gigantic limb flashing through the sky. His limbs had been ripped off cleanly, teeth clenching tight in anger and pain. His tail whipped forward, slamming toward the figure that appeared behind him, but even that was for naught. A cross-storm of axelight slashed through the entirety of his tail with incredible speed, slicing them into loaves. She moved like a glitch in space, one moment forward, the next behind with incomprehensible precision. Ryuk's eyes spun, trying to follow her movements, but he failed. His enemy reappeared, now wielding two abyssal axes, slashing towards his heart with terrifying speed. An enraged roar blasted from his soul, white flames and frost exploding violently across his frame. "Tich!" she scoffed in annoyance as she jumped back into the air, quickly avoiding the white flames. Once again, her grip tightened around her axes. Raising them behind her head, she chanted, "Nihil Devil Art! All Might Rend!" Her fifth call. Instantly, a towering phantom, 1,000 meters tall, loomed behind her. A dark-veiled entity clutching a scythe, its pitch-black eyes fixed unblinking on Ryuk. It moved, swinging its scythe above Ryuk's head, just as she slashed forward with both axes. An arc of scythe light, so overwhelming in power that it swallowed everything within Ryuk's senses. The sensation of impending death loomed, causing him to act with desperation. His battered, bloodied body surged forward toward the oncoming energy. His maw opened wide, white flames erupting from deep within, and then, his teeth slammed shut around the dark blade of the phantom, divine flames dancing across his shielded mouth. Cracks spread across his fangs, and his neck as he was blasted downwards, but Ryuk held firm, clenching harder until, kaboom! The phantom blade shattered into oblivion, followed by a raging explosion that hurled him deeper into the abyss. Swallowed by flame, smoke, and ruin, a figure landed right into the deepest crater of the abyss, and silence covered it for a while. Ryuk's eyes spun wildly in their sockets. He tried to raise his body, but he failed to feel it. His two front limbs had been ripped off, along with one of his back legs, leaving just one limb barely holding him up. Cracks and cuts laced every inch of his body, and where his right eye should have been, a deep axe-shaped wound throbbed. He hacked up a couple more mouthfuls of blood as his form began breaking apart. Hurricane energy, 20,000, minus 17,000. Remaining hurricane energy, 3,000. His colossal form disappeared, the remainder of his energy unable to sustain it any longer, and he returned to his weakly-looking human form. Rolling off his back, his hands bored into the ground beneath him and pushed against it, rising to one knee. He muttered, "Buy one more high-grade healing serum. One high-grade serum bought. -210,000 purchase points. Remaining purchase points, 0. The system panel blinked. A vial appeared in Ryuk's hand, and he downed it in one gulp, shattering the bottle in his grasp. A groan escaped as electrifying energy surged through his veins. His wounds closed, the slash sealed, his endurance returned, and he forced himself back to his feet. As he raised his head, he saw her, slowly descending from the abyss sky. Her once dull, dark eyes were now flashing like candle flames in a storm. In her grasp were two massive axes, oozing with an aura so thick Ryuk couldn't even begin to comprehend it. But one thing he knew for sure was that these weapons were far beyond divine grade, capable of cleaving through his colossal form like it was butter. Her grin stretched wide into a feral maw, her dark hair thrashing wildly around her. "Back on your feet again after all that beating?" she said. A pillar of dark energy blasted from her, slamming into the abyss below and piercing straight through the sky. "Just how long before you're finally done?" Her words resonated deeply within Ryuk's soul. His teeth clenched in fury and disbelief as he watched the energy storm swirling around her. She was like a sun, a star whose core would never run out. Every time he was beaten to the ground and rose up, he would be faced with her flaring with double the previous power that had been enough to beat him to the ground previously. And with every defeat, she flared with more power, and more power, and more power. He was close to his last leg, and she was now radiating an aura twice as strong as when she'd first crushed him. This was a gruesome battle, not just of pain, but soul-crushing despair. Every time he stood back up, she returned twice as powerful as before. There were cracks in her armor, some holes even, revealing she had taken hits. But every cut on her body had healed. To Ryuk, it felt like fighting for nothing. "I can still fight," Ryuk whispered beneath his breath. He slammed a foot into the ground, launching into close combat. "I can still win," he muttered, and in the next instant his form glitched. He reappeared in the air. A shockwave tore through the sky as his fist collided with her axe. Her second axe came cleaving toward his left shoulder, but hit nothing but a fading image. Ryuk swerved, dodging the strike and slamming a leg down toward her head. Once more, his leg struck her axe, but this time its edge was turned upward, carving a deep line through his knee. "Tch!" Ryuk punched forward, aiming for her stomach, only for his fist to smash once more against her weapon. Suddenly, she flashed, and all Ryuk saw was a knee magnifying toward his face. Kaboom! His body was flung backward like dead weight, slamming into the ground and carving the abyss even deeper. Trickle. White blood dripped down his nose. He dragged himself out of the crater, only to collapse to a knee, coughing out another mouthful of blood. His skull was caved in, with a diagonal slash running across his face. "She's gotten thrice as strong as before," he cursed under his breath. "She's not getting stronger, Ryuk. She's slowly releasing her reserve, doubling her output every time you get back up, and now tripling it. In short, she's just playing around." The system notification blinked. A truth Ryuk couldn't comprehend. Even after awakening his sigil and receiving a boost in power, he was still losing, and she hadn't even reached her peak yet. Footsteps echoed, and when he raised his head, all he saw was a thigh before him. Looking up, her grinning face was barely an arm's length away. Ryuk's arm jerked up, delivering an uppercut straight into her jaw. Her face tilted skyward, a line of blood rushing out from her nose and into the air. But then, she grinned, a mixture of insanity and enjoyment. Her eye flashed with another rune, and then her axe came cleaving downward toward his ribcage and pinning him to the ground instantly. She raised the axe upward again, and dangling off the edge was Ryuk. With a slight twitch of her grip, he fell to the floor, blood oozing from a deep arc carved into his chest. A glimpse of his faintly pulsing white heart was visible through the wound, the sight of it sending her breath ragging with desire. He remained motionless after, and she crouched on one knee, face to face with him, closer than ever. Ryuk felt the urge to claw at her face, but he had nothing left. He had some endurance stats, but the weakness wasn't just physical. It came from his soul. He had fought and lost and kept rising again and again, until something inside him finally refused to get back up. He had reached his limit. Finally done? Oh! The faint gasp of surprise left the Nihil woman's lips as she watched the battered young man slowly raise his shaky hand, clenching his fingers together before reaching forth towards her. The fist hovered an inch from her nose, trembling, until it finally dropped. And the moment it dropped, Ryuk's aura dropped completely as well. That was when she finally sensed his true aura level. "Perfection Apocrypha stage?" she muttered, bewildered. "You're only at the Apocrypha stage?" She was at the Null stage, a stage twice beyond Apocrypha. And yet, she had drawn her weapon to face someone only at the Apocrypha stage? The realization brought her such disbelief that, for a long moment, she simply stood there in silence, eyes fixed on him as he lay drowning in his pool of blood. His life aura waned with every passing second, And eventually, she sighed. Her weapons disappeared from her grasp, and she rose to her feet. One hand reached down and grabbed Ryuk's unconscious body from the ground. Then, with a rumble, the abyss beneath them shook as she burst upward, rocketing toward the mountain above. Ryuk had accepted it. His death was inevitable, and as a precaution, he had held onto the abyssal chains, hoping that, when this body died, he would reawaken within his main body, back in the Snowardo ship. Yet, when he opened his eyes, it wasn't to the cold metal walls of an aircraft. No flickering monitors, nor his pets or companions rushing to his side. Instead, he woke to dim lighting, cast from a single blue candle burning quietly nearby. He blinked. No windows. The room resembled an ancient cave, walls etched with glowing runic inscriptions, symbols he couldn't comprehend. There was a small table, a futon to the side, and a couple of stacked stone slabs. He was lying on a suspended platform, primitive, rectangular, and supported by thick stone pillars. A mattress sat on top, and by the way his body was positioned, it almost felt like someone had tucked him in. "Where am I?" he asked himself, rising to sit. But pain flared instantly, and he clenched his teeth. Looking down, he noticed he wore no clothes, enabling him to see the white bandages tightly wrapped around his chest. He reached toward them with one hand, but upon touch, flinched as pain shot through his ribs. "You shouldn't do that." The voice echoed from the cave's entrance. Ryuk turned. She stood there, dressed in a more casual outfit. A pitch-dark robe, its hoodie unworn behind her neck. It revealed her bewitching face bathed in soft blue light from the lighting, and that familiar grin. His instincts kicked in. "Activate Beyonder Dragon," he commanded mentally. But what followed? Blood burst from Ryuk's lips, white blood soaking the bandages, as he slammed back into the bed, writhing in agony. The air faintly shifted, and 2 fingers tapped gently on his forehead. Beyonder Dragon skill deactivated. Host is advised not to activate any technique due to severe bodily and soul injury. The system's notification blinked before his eyes as her hand pulled away. Then she sat calmly beside him on the bed. "Your incomplete soul was further injured during your struggle," she said softly. "If you stubbornly activate any technique, your soul will burn out before you can even." "What do you want from me?" Ryuk cut in, voice low but sharp. She turned and looked directly into his eyes, purple and black irises shimmering under the candlelight. Then, she grinned. "How did you know I wanted something from you?" she asked. "Do I look beyond being a kind person?" He nodded. "The only reason to keep someone who tried to kill you alive is either naive stupidity, which I think at 1,000+ years, you should be far beyond, or you want something from me. Something important enough for you to take the risk." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "Risk of what?" "Of me making a second attempt on your life," he said. She burst into laughter. It was the kind of laugh that danced on the edge, part feminine melody, part wicked cackle. "You wouldn't be a threat to my life even if you were 5 times stronger than when you collapsed," she said matter-of-factly, after her laughter receded. "Let alone now, when you can't even move a finger. Don't try to switch the narrative, young man. You're the one at risk here, having me this close, when you can't even move a finger." Her hands moved gently, landing on his bandaged chest. Her fingers slowly lengthened, sharp, claw-like, and slid upward past his neck. She watched him with an amused grin as his gaze remained unwavering. "Don't worry," she whispered, claws lightly scraping his skin. "I don't plan on killing you anymore." "And why is that?" Ryuk asked. A chill crawled down his spine as her claws cradled the side of his jaw. He looked into her eyes and found his answers. Lust. Not mild or gentle, but deeply burning, monstrous lust. It raged in her eyes like a storm, growing stronger with every second. And he finally confirmed when he saw the faint pink hue of a blush across her cheek. Don't tell me you're that desperate to sleep with a boy who just turned 18, he said, inhaling silently in relief when he saw her claws halt, then slowly retracted. "You're 18?" she asked. And he nodded thrice. "Well, even better," the woman said with a slight smile. "I'm guessing you haven't been tainted yet, then." "I have," Ryuk replied back. "Oh, really?" she asked amusedly. "Yes, I've slept with," he said, pausing and his eyes seeming to count the number before he completed. "Exactly 17 women by now," he said, only to watch her giggle. "You say that and yet blush so hard from a simple touch?" she asked, her fingers sliding downwards, farther and farther from his chest, and watching as his face grew even more red. An 18-year-old who has slept with 17 women can't radiate such a cute naiveness. Can he? Why are you even worried about that type of thing? The system notification suddenly blinked before Ryuk's closed eyes, prompting him to open them. "Ha!" It flashed thrice, and for the first time, Ryuk exhaled in relief. At least his first time wouldn't be ruined by this demonic woman. With that newfound confidence, he turned back to her, only to see her pause in shock, staring at him in disbelief. "Did you?" she said, her lips moving but no words coming out, before she eventually forced them through. "Did you lose it in the battle?" she asked, her face growing pinker with every passing second. That was when it finally clicked for Ryuk, and the system panel flashed. "Seems like someone finally knows your little secret." The realization caught in his lips, words failing to rise, and cheeks turning ruby red, and so he did the only thing he could, shutting his eyes from the embarrassment. "Go away," he whispered. Her disbelief faded into an amused giggle. "You really are one abnormal kid," she said. But then, Ryuk felt the pressure in the room shift. It stilled, like an incoming storm, and he opened his eyes to the sight of her, now serious, wearing a focused expression. "I have a couple of questions for you," she began. "And if I sense even a single lie, I'll instantly kill you." That was surprising to him. Even during their battle, she had never displayed such seriousness. But now, every word carried weight, like it was her will manifesting itself. "The first is, what's your name?" "Ryuk," he replied simply. "Your full name," she added. "Ryuk Null." At the mention of that, Ryuk noticed her breath catch for just a moment, like one who had difficulty breathing. It was silent and subtle, almost like a mirage. "Secondly, your tattoos. They shift into the energy state of anything they come in contact with, don't they?" She reached her hand forward to his chest, and the moment it touched, abyssal energy began oozing from Ryuk, the purple color of his tattoos changing to black. "In the fight, back when I held that girl, you touched my hand, copied my abyssal energy, and your form shifted into a 7-meter-tall nullic transformation," she said, her hand still pressed against his chest, and now shifting to where his heart was beating. There was no change in her tone, but Ryuk could sense the leaking bloodlust behind every word. "I want to ask you an important question," she said, eyes closing. "One that will determine everything. She already touched you, and you now have her abyssal energy. If you plan to escape back to your main body, this is your best chance." The system's notification blinked, and it was right. Ryuk had noticed upon awakening that Owen's abyssal chains had been taken off him, rendering him unable to shift. But now, she was unknowingly feeding him the energy needed. Yet, as he looked at her closed eyes, as if she awaited a heavenly decree, and listened to the slowly loud pounding of her heart, he felt curious. Why would she react in such an extreme way to a simple question about his null transformation? Was there something she knew, something she needed to confirm? Whatever it was, Ryuk felt it deep in his core. If he answered, he might learn something bigger. "The null transformation," he began, watching as her eyes remained shut, "is my original null transformation." She opened her eyes quickly. "Your original null transformation?" she repeated, and Ryuk nodded. "But you don't have a null bloodline. Your bloodline is an ancient beastly line. It leans toward the draconic type." She paused, confused, watching him nod. Yes, I currently bear a beastly bloodline, but I used to have a null bloodline before I replaced it with this one. She remained silent. So my null transformation was what I once had, when I was a null. And in our fight, I simply copied back what I once was. His heart didn't stutter. His words were smooth, and the lie detection runes didn't blink. She glanced at the dim runes lining the wall in confirmation. Of course, they weren't ordinary runes she drew for decoration. They were ancient lie detection scripts, ones she had placed specifically for this moment. And they weren't reacting, meaning he was telling the truth. Her hand slowly moved off his chest. So, you once were a null, before purging yourself and embracing a new bloodline. And that transformation was once your true null form. She summarized, watching him nod. And you said your name is Ryuk Null? Another nod. She slowly rose to her feet, turning to the ancient runes carved on the cave wall. Her claws retracted into hands as she gently traced them with her fingers. Tell me something, she said, her voice almost trembling, but her back still to him, making him unable to see her expression. Have you heard of a name? What name? Ryuk asked. Faith Vorgoth. And the instant those words were spoken, her ears twitched, and she heard it, Ryuk's own heartbeat rising by just one silent beat. She turned toward him, flashing a grin. So you do know that name, she said, stepping back toward him. But she couldn't help but notice. His eyes had turned cold. So cold, the temperature in the cave felt like it dropped several degrees. I will not answer any questions you may ask of him, Ryuk said calmly. What's your relationship with him? All she got in response was a mocking smirk. I already told, he began, but suddenly froze as her hands gripped his throat, climbing on top of him and pinning him to the bed, while her hands shifted into monstrous claws that tightened harder and harder against his neck. Tell me, what is your relationship with Faith Vorgoth? Her voice roared, dark flames bursting forth from her eyes. But all Ryuk had was a poker expression that didn't change even as the last bit of air was being squeezed out of his lungs. I'd rather die than call him that. The thought echoed silently in Ryuk's head. Anger and thirst for answers brewed from deep within the Nihil woman's soul. Yet even as she felt herself squeezed tighter, life slipping from his body, his face turning pale, a sudden realization, and in the end, she let him go, releasing her hard grip. His expression said it all, holding more determination than she had seen even in his previous struggle against her in battle. You truly won't say a word about him, even if it kills you? She asked, watching as he took a deep inhale to settle his heartbeat. That's fine by me, she said with a shrug. Eventually, I'll learn all of your secrets, if I keep you by my side long enough, she said, as she leaned in closer to him. He could feel her soft body press tightly against his. The previously cold temperature seemed to grow hotter and hotter, as Ryuk felt her dark irises staring into his shimmering purple eyes, her lips getting closer. His eyes shut as he turned his head to the side, leaving his neck wide open to her, and her expression widened into a beastly smile. Her breath grew ragged as she gazed keenly at the green veins and the flowing blood pulsing beneath them. Closer she leaned in, and a cold feeling spread across Ryuk's skin, followed by a sharp sting that caused his eyes to snap open, stinging pain followed by a surprised gasp. Blood flowed freely from his neck, the source none other than the fangs that had sunk deep into his vein. Yes, the Nihil woman currently had her fangs in his neck. The sound of her sucking his blood echoed through the cave, dragging on for nearly 10 seconds before she finally withdrew, collapsing by his side on the bed. Her dark eyes stared into his, and within their depth, the lust in them was gone. Now, they held a satisfaction, one of a magnitude he had never seen in any soul before. You are one of the most handsome men I, Odette Nihil, have ever laid eyes on. And believe me, I've seen enough to say so, she whispered. But even then, I'm still not desperate for your body. In truth, all I needed was your untainted blood, she said with an evil smirk, one that sent a cold realization through Ryuk. How could he have forgotten? The crimson demons they encountered on Nihility had tried to awaken the ancient being using the blood of the foreigner archguards. That meant whoever they were trying to awaken had some deep history with blood, belonging to those powerful. And now, this woman was the one they encountered within the gate said to hide that monster. She had shown desire toward him, but somehow, he had never realized it wasn't lust for his body, it was hunger for his blood. "You seem surprised," she said, pulling him back from his thoughts. "Or, are you disappointed instead?" She added with a smirk that made Ryuk's eyebrow twitch. "You wish," he forced out, barely moving through his paralyzed state. She smiled sweetly, letting silence fill the space before turning to him again. "Now that I'm full, I should have enough power to leave this prison of a realm and return to the outside world," she said, as Ryuk's heart thudded loudly. What fate awaited the world if this 1,000-year-old monster were released onto it? "And I'll never let you leave my side," she whispered right after. It prompted him to worry more about his own fate than whatever could occur to the outside world. "You've had the blood you wanted. Why still keep me by your side?" he asked, confused, as she giggled sweetly. "Your potential alone makes killing you a waste. And also, your bloodline is very pure. Almost out of this universe, and a bonus than that is the fact that you're still a virgin. Untainted. Making it sweeter than anything I've ever tasted. I won't just let that go," she said while her fingers gently rubbed the blood dripping from the punctures in his neck. "Most important of all, though, is that I want to know what your relationship is with Faith Vorgith," she finished, withdrawing her fingers and licking his blood off them. Then she rose to her feet and moved toward the exit, pausing to glance back at him. "Rest up to regain some strength. We'll be leaving this place soon," she said, and right after, she was gone, fading into a dark mist that dispersed into the void of space. Ryuk's eyes remained on the spot where she vanished, and a moment later, he whispered softly beneath his breath, "Odette Nihil." His eyebrows crisscrossed faintly. "Quite the peculiar name, isn't it?" The system spoke casually, and Ryuk nodded. "Yes, but don't you find it familiar?" he asked. "Ha! Her name is Odette Nihil, making her surname Nihil, and she belongs to the Nihil race," Ryuk said. "My name is Ryuk Null, with the Null being my surname, and I also happen to originally belong to the Null race. In both our cases, our surnames are the names of our races. Are these unique surnames just a coincidence? Or is there a deeper truth being hidden?" The system fell silent. Also, on the way to the island, the vast mountains around us all held doors carved into their sides, suggesting someone or something once lived there. Perhaps the other Nihils. Yet she's the only living presence here. Were the rest of her race wiped out like Orlith claimed? If so, how did she survive a calamity powerful enough to erase her entire race? Her extraordinary might or something else? Does that make her the last Nihil left in this universe? An array of questions bubbled inside Ryuk's mind, but they brought nothing but a pounding headache and made him feel even more drained. His body was nowhere near healed, and having his blood sucked left him twice as tired as before. "I need to regain my strength and find a way to escape her grasp. But at least, she's not trying to take my life, for now," he thought, and finally his consciousness surrendered to the darkness. His breath steadied, the room returning to its initial quietness. He had no idea how much time had passed, but when he opened his eyes, a bright, shimmering purple light flashed across the primitive room. He felt control return to his body, prompting him to raise his arms to his face, clenching and unclenching his fingers without trouble. "Congratulations on your full recovery." The system panel flashed before his face as Ryuk sat up in the bed, the soles of his feet grazing the warm cave floor. It was warmer than normal, but only for a second before his body temperature instantly adapted to the environment. Ryuk rose to his feet, the sound of bones cracking resonating through the room, and a satisfied smile appeared on his lips. "I've recovered, and somehow I feel even twice stronger than my previous base strength." He thought silently to himself. Odette was nowhere to be found, but the exit was clearly visible, and so he called out, "Activate system interface. Congratulations, host, on completing the quest. Find the missing archguards. Rewards issued. 1. Plus 10 million EXP. 2. Plus 7 level-up cards. System Interface 2.0. Name Ryuk Null. Race, Beyonder Dragon. Age 18. Level, 192. EXP, 2099200/36 million. Level-up cards. 7. Used level-up cards? Yes. Ryuk replied. -1 level-up card used. Host has leveled up to level 193. Plus 50 attribute points obtained. -1 level-up card used. Host has leveled up to level 194. Plus 50 attribute points obtained. -1 level-up card used. Host has leveled up to level 199. Plus 50 attribute points obtained. Level-up cards left, 0. Total attributes points obtained, 350. Attribute panel. Physical dominance 10,000. Velocis 10,000. Core stability 10,000. Mimetic awakening 10,000. Cosmic gravitas 5,000. Attribute points, 950. Note: all bracketed stats are the new stats obtained from Host's awakening of his first bloodline sigil, and higher comprehension of his hurricane power. All my attributes have doubled since I came on this quest, he thought to himself, a small smile crawling up his face. On this mission, he had pushed himself to the brink of death time and time again, awakening the first sigil in his bloodline and battling until his soul nearly gave out. But it rewarded him more than he could have hoped. Coming on this journey was worth it, he concluded. He turned back to the system and noticed something peculiar. I'm currently at level 199. Just one more before level 200. Ryuk thought silently, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken. Why is my heart pounding just from the thought of reaching level 200? Somehow, I feel like level 200 won't be a simple level up, he mused, but waved off the unsettling feeling as the panel dispersed. Dwelling on that now is a waste. I'll think of it when the time comes. His raised fist dropped, and he turned to the wide-open exit. Having regained his full power, he felt even more confident and stepped outside into the real world, and was beyond surprised. Above him in the sky was a gigantic crimson-colored runic circle being drawn by a lone figure. Behind her loomed a cloaked, dark-robed phantom with devilish features, its skeletal fingers carving each rune into the fabric of the heavens. What is that? Ryuk thought silently. That's a bloodline phantom, the system notified. According to the information bank, those at the null stage have achieved the peak of what their bloodline is capable of, and so they can summon its original form in a metaphysical state, doubling their power. But doing so drains a large amount of energy and is usually avoided. The system explained as Ryuk hummed beneath his breath. She had used it once during their battle, the scythe strike of the phantom, which he had eventually shattered with his maw, had almost succeeded in finishing him off for good. For her to be using it just to try and create a portal out to the world, that shows how powerful the restrictive seal on this realm is, he reasoned. He noticed her soon rising, coming to stand atop the phantom's shoulder. You're finally awake? She asked with her usual wicked grin. That seemed to be her default smile now, and Ryuk didn't read too much into it as he stepped forward. The space beneath his feet hardened into glass. Something tried to drag him down, the realm's law preventing one from standing in the sky, yet Ryuk felt his purple tattoos shimmer with occasional new colors. Wait, are they? Each step cracked the glass beneath his feet, but by the 10th step, there were no longer any cracks or resistance. His tattoos had adapted. It can not only adapt to energy, but realm laws too? I didn't expect that, he mused. He arrived beneath the massive rune being carved into the sky, watching as her hands moved like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, the result of which was the phantom continuing to draw out the rune in the sky. Can you guess what I'm doing, Ryuk? Odette asked, her focus fixed on the massive sigil. Ryuk observed it for a moment. You're drawing a runic portal that leads out of the realm. She turned her head from the giant shoulder toward him. Exactly. And I'm wondering, now that you've recovered your strength, will you try to stop me? She added, a grin full of bloodlust and battle intent curling across her lips. Ryuk thought silently, his brain working easily faster than they have ever done. Orlith had mentioned that outsiders were not allowed in her family's realm. Through her escape ritual art, they would be imprisoned. Even she, a peak Exignis stage cultivator, couldn't bypass that rule, and all she could do for me was convince her family elders that I helped her. And even that, I will still have to spend at least a month imprisonment. That meant the ones who set the rule must be above the Exignis stage, which she is. Most likely, her elders are at the null stage, the same stage as her. He thought, looking back to stare at Odette, who still held her grin. If Odette returned to Amamura and tried anything reckless, she'd likely be suppressed instantly by a team of angels at the same cultivation stage as hers or even beyond. The realization gave him his answer. I won't stop you. Ha! She said out loud and lengthily, and Ryuk raised an eyebrow at her disappointed expression. I was so hopeful, she muttered under her breath, turning her attention away from him. His eyebrow twitched. Are you cursed with a need to fight or something? He wondered silently. Hey, it can't be that I beat the bravery out of you, can it? She asked, her tone quieter. Ryuk simply shrugged and replied. No. Good. I don't appreciate the presence of spineless cowards, as nothing good ever comes from keeping them around. She murmured, finally turning her focus back to what she was doing. The rune continued to etch itself into the sky. Ryuk merely observed, like a distant outsider. Silence stretched for about an hour, until his curiosity could no longer hold him back. There are a lot of doors in the mountains around here. They're houses, right? He asked. Huh, she replied, not looking away. I'm guessing those from your Nihil race once lived there, but...
Primer cant sense any living presença.
What? What happened to the rest of your race? He asked, trying not to sound too probing. Her reply came, expected yet not in the way he anticipated. They're all dead, she said flatly, as if she weren't talking about her own people at all. I'm sorry, Ryuk offered, only to see her turn her gaze down at him, grinning as she replied. Don't be. We were quite the menace when we were alive. We don't deserve pity. She paused briefly, then added. And yeah, those were the words of the ones who killed us all. Or at least, almost succeeded in killing us all, she said, turning back to the rune she was crafting. Ryuk's voice broke the pause. If you get out of here, will you go look for him? For revenge, she hummed. He's dead, she replied bluntly. You managed to kill him before you were sealed? Sealed? She asked. Yes. How did you know I was sealed? I might have just been sitting on these mountains, waiting for you to arrive, she countered. There were a couple of crimson demons performing a ritual to awaken a powerful ancient being. They were killing people and using their blood to channel energy, and the gate to where that energy was sent was right here. Ryuk explained. Crimson demons, huh? She repeated, her eyes crossing with memory and a familiar remembrance. Fools, she added, causing Ryuk's expression to plummet. And no, I didn't kill him before I was sealed. When the rest of my race was slaughtered, I was the last one still standing. Eventually, I was subdued, though I did manage to take down about 7,000 of them first, she added with a feral, psychotic grin. But just before they could kill me, I smelled his scent. They smelled it too, and when they did, they didn't want to waste any more time finishing me off. So instead, they sealed me to go face him. But I'm sure they all met their end by his hands, she said, a claim that sent a chill through Ryuk's chest. Just who is this he she's so certain could avenge her by defeating those who were able to subdue her herself? He wondered. But he didn't ask, and he felt he already knew too much in a moment. And from how she had not continued after his words, It was clear she wasn't willing to reveal more. Suddenly, the wind around them surged wildly. Ryuk turned his gaze to the sky, where the massive runes now glowed powerfully. "Finally done," she announced with glee. But Ryuk's eyes narrowed as the phantom behind her dissolved into motes of light and she plummeted toward the ground. He acted fast, appearing on one knee and catching her inches before she hit the earth. "So heavy," he thought, straining as he tried to lift her. "She's unconscious, huh?" he muttered, looking down at her gentle expression and slow, calm breathing. This is a good chance to end it all. One claw straight to her heart, and the quest will be completed. Do it quickly. The system's notifications flashed urgently, sounding like a scary villain. Ryuk hummed in reply, but then, from the depths of his eyes, divine white flames flickered, and his expression darkened. Slowly, he turned his head toward where she had previously stood. "What do you think you're doing, Odette?" he asked aloud, releasing his grip and letting her fall to the ground. But the Odette he carried instantly vanished into dark mist upon landing. From the direction Ryuk faced, space rippled and someone stepped out. The real Odette, with her usual mischievous grin painted across her lips. "A doppelganger?" The system panel flashed. The wind whipped around them as she appeared directly in front of him. "Just a little test," she said. "Wanted to see whether I should kill you here or bring you out with me." Her evil grin widened. "You passed, though, so good for you." She floated back up toward the sky. "Now come. We've only got a few seconds before the energy runs out," she called, a rare urgency in her voice. Ryuk followed, arriving at the edge of the red portal as its center glowed with crimson motes of light that rapidly multiplied, forming a spinning vortex. He waited for it to fully form, but then, a hand seized his own, much to his surprise. He turned towards his source, to see her grinning at him, her eyes blazing. A moment later, the world flashed as they were dragged together through the portal, vanishing from the realm. Just 2 seconds after their disappearance, the carved runic gateway in the sky collapsed, fading into dark motes and leaving the world in eternal silence. The feeling was different from a normal teleportation. The closest Ryuk could compare it to was when he had moved from End-Earth to Amamura, where he found himself flashing toward a golden planet in a golden void. But this time, there was no golden planet. Instead, a void of red, with dots of black hanging in the far distance like stars. He felt himself being pulled forward through this crimson expanse by the hands gripping tightly onto his wrist. Time passed. How much he couldn't comprehend, but it eventually stopped, the movement, the rushing, all of it ceased, and then, pain shot through Ryuk's head as it slammed into something solid. A moment later, control and perception returned to him, and he burst up from the ground where his head had smashed. "Arg!" The groan forced itself from his lips as his hands reached up, rubbing the sore spot. He had landed vertically, headfirst into the dirt, buried in a crater beneath him. "Amateur!" The mocking comment rang out from the side, and Ryuk turned to see Odette standing nearby, arms folded, looking down at him with that familiar damn newbie expression. How are you? You cheater!" Ryuk called out at the injustice. Somehow, he had landed headfirst while she stood calmly, having touched down perfectly on her feet. It was clear she cheated somehow. She was the one dragging him forward through the space after all. "I didn't cheat," Odette defended. "It was the void we traveled through that cheated us both, taking us backward instead of forward. I wasn't an amateur, though, so I didn't fall for its tricks," she added, placing sharp emphasis on the word amateur. Ryuk's teeth ground together. "I'm not an amateur," he defiantly thought, pushing himself to his feet, and then paused, surprised. "We're back on Nihility," he said in relief. The familiar crimson moon still floated above, and the ground beneath him exuded that same peculiar dark mist. Returning brought more relief to Ryuk than he expected. "Wait, what did you just call this planet?" Odette asked. Ryuk turned to find her staring at him in disbelief. "I said, we're back on Nihility?" he repeated. She studied his face for a moment, then burst into laughter. That's a really good one, she said, grabbing Ryuk's shoulder hard enough to nearly crack it under the weight of her hand. But as she looked back at Ryuk, who beheld a deadpan expression, her laughter abruptly stopped. Wait, what? She asked, as Ryuk pried her hand off and rubbed his sore shoulder. Somebody once told me that Nihility used to be twice the size of a massive planet, home to an ancient evil race known as the Nihils. But 1,000 years ago, they fought another evil race and lost. The Nihils were wiped out, and the war tore about 70% of Nihility's surface away, leaving this broken star as the last remnant of its existence. So yes, this is Nihility. Or should I say your world? He finished, watching her turn in a full circle, slowly taking it all in. It used to be so grand, she whispered, and then an overwhelming wave of murderous intent burst from her figure as the air violently whipped around them. What the hell? Ryuk gasped as the pressure slammed into his face, strong enough to start dragging him back. It used to have 7 crimson moons and 4 lunar stars, revolving in a pentagram order, Odette said quietly. Yet her voice, despite the distance, carried through the thick intent to Ryuk's ears. The sky was another world entirely. Floating islands filled it, architectural marvels never seen within a 1,000,000-kilometer radius. There was the Nihil Castle, its spires piercing through the clouds, radiating energy that rippled through the entire world. How? She whispered, stepping forward. How did it become so desolate and broken? With each step, the world around her changed. The cracked floor was replaced with glowing red gems beneath her feet. From the clouds, light spilled down, crimson and white blending into a breathtaking hue. A peaceful breeze danced around her, gently fluttering her hair and gown. In the distance stood a colossal castle, dark and gleaming, with jagged edges piercing into space itself. Its surface shimmered with glowing runic symbols, pulsing faintly with red and dark crimson energy. Above her, lofty clouds rolled, and on top of them sat floating islands so massive they could rival entire planetary cities. Around her, beasts galloped past. Behind them, carriages carrying groups of smiling, waving people. Children ran ahead, dragging their laughing mothers along. Joyful shouts rang from groups of men running shoulder to shoulder, playful and loud. The scene stirred the emotion of nostalgia, resulting in a single tear sliding from her right eye and down her cheek. The droplet crystallized as it fell, and when it hit the ground, the sound of shattering glass echoed out. The world around her, so perfect, cracked apart like a broken mirror, dissolving into wind and ash. In its place, a world returned, scarred by craters formed from blade marks. An abyss with endless depth, with destruction evident in every direction. Dark mist oozed from the ground, and a putrid, stagnant air filled the skies. Above it all loomed the single crimson moon, which only further added to the haunting aura. It used to be home, she murmured, her fingers clenched into a tight fist, dark blood dripping from her palm and staining the ground. But all of a sudden it changed. The remnants of tears on her face faded away into dark mist, and the emotion of nostalgia ripped away from her heart. In its place, a pain twisted into cold fury, turning her eyes lifeless and darker. She turned, her gaze locking onto Ryuk, who stood silently in the distance. His eyes avoided hers when she looked into them, but only for a moment before meeting hers again. And then he whispered, You can never understand. Could he, Ryuk, understand? What it meant to be sealed for 1,000 years. Could he understand the pain of returning after 1,000 years just to be faced with his world having been reduced to nothing but desolation? Or could he understand what it felt like to be the sole, last surviving individual of a once powerful ancient race? These questions were asked by none other than Ryuk himself, and as he looked at her, the words he was to speak halted in his throat, and he quieted down instead. The truth was, anything he could say right now to comfort her would look nothing but hypocritical, for he couldn't understand any of what she had gone through. Perhaps if Endearth had been destroyed by Zarkul and his Null armies, maybe then he could have understood what it means to lose your world. But Endearth never got destroyed. How could one who had always succeeded understand the pain of one who has failed? And for that, he remained silent until she spoke a single word that shook Ryuk's heart. Leave. It was a simple command that left no room for argument, but one which he couldn't grasp. She had made it clear she would never let him go, and now she was asking for him to leave? I don't need to know more about Thaith Vorgith, nor do I care about your relationship with him anymore. You can leave now, she said once more, her back turned against him. All Ryuk Sel wanted to do at the moment was instantly speed away. He could return back to Amamura and everything that had happened, him entering the gate and ever meeting this monster. All of it could be a dream that was just too real. He could return to his normal life, returning to making something of himself in Amamura. He could leave. But, what? He suddenly called out, but halted. Still, it was enough to turn her attention. What about my blood, though? You said it's too rare to let go, didn't you? He asked, a question that made her irises quiver. But it soon settled, turning even colder, and she spat out. I'll find a better one. Leave, she said. But instead of retreating, he took a single step, and in a blink, he was just a couple of inches away. I won't leave, Ryuk said, in the same tone she had used to ask him to leave, a tone that held no room for argument. I said. She spoke slowly, every word dripping with fiery anger. Leave, she roared, and in the next moment, her hands shifted back with a speed faster than lightning, claws instantly appearing, and then, the space before Ryuk rippled as a claw tore through the air. Kaboom! A terrifying shockwave exploded through the air, blowing his hair erratically behind him, but it hung just an inch from his face. What? What? The two exclamations rang out, from the system and in Odette's mind, as she watched her claws pause just 5 centimeters away from cleaving through his face. But what was shocking was that both his hands were by his side, and he had never made a move to block. An invisible barrier? She asked herself, but when she saw the single stain of blood that moved out from his nose, no, it's not a barrier. It's me. Her claws had halted by themselves in the air. TCH. A groan of anger left her lips as she tried to force her hands to continue in their path, but they halted when the sound of a single step forward rang in her ears, and then, she felt his embrace. Her dark irises slowly widened with realization, followed by her outstretched claws spasming midair, and then, slowly, they fell. Her knees seemed to have gotten weaker, resulting in her collapsing onto the floor, but it was almost like the same was true for him as he followed her down. I do understand what it feels like to be the only one left. Nor do I understand what it feels like to have my world destroyed, he whispered, softer than anything she had ever heard. But I do understand. No one deserves to be left alone like this. No one deserves to go through so much pain all alone. The words brought back the tears. Tears she couldn't explain. They weren't nostalgia for what was, nor were they anger for what had been. She couldn't put into words what the reason for her tears was. But even though she felt weaker than she had ever been, it couldn't erase it all. You don't know me, she forced out through the gaps in her teeth. All that has happened to me, I must have deserved. Her hands shifted into claws, folding tightly into her palm. But it came once more, softening the tight feeling. Maybe you're right, he replied. Maybe you truly were a monster deserving of all this pain, he said, as he parted from the hug, turning to look her right in the eyes. But, even for a monster. His hands stretched toward her face, and for some reason, it never occurred to her to dodge them. Perhaps it's not too late to start all over again. Correctly, he said with a smile, as his fingers wiped off her tears. But they only spilled harder and harder. You can't start all over again, Odette. And this time, you will have the most tasty blood in the universe willingly following alongside you, he said with a foolish, goofy smile. It was a stupid notion. She knew anyone in his shoes could tell it was so stupid. Yet somehow, it was so heartwarming that even through all the pain in her heart, she found a reason to smile. "So, what do you say, Odette? You think we can both start all over again?" he asked. But less than a split second later, a deep embrace that almost broke his backbone, draining all air from his lungs. "Stop! Stop! Stop! You'll break my back! TCH monster!" Ryuk cursed under his breath as he rubbed his throbbing spine. He stared up in hate at Odette, who held her evil grin and a satisfied expression on her lips as she looked at him wincing in pain. "That's for daring to hug me without permission, HMPF," she huffed. Ryuk clicked his tongue, but the pain didn't linger long. He asked, "So, what do you plan on doing before?" he asked her, as her pupils narrowed before she turned to the direction she was previously facing. She pointed into the dark void. "I was planning on going in that direction, and every planet I see will be destroyed, with all of its inhabitants drained of their blood," she said with a chilling seriousness that made Ryuk's spine chill within him. "I'll keep going until I reach the final planet, the Ark's base. I'll destroy them all, then move on to their next base," she said, turning to look at Ryuk, who had his jaw hanging down, all color drained from his face. "Is that a joke?" he asked, just to be sure. "Does it look like one?" she replied, raising an eyebrow. Both stared silently at each other for a while, her with her "what's wrong?" expression, and Ryuk, who opened and closed his lips, trying to mutter a word but with nothing coming out. "You know what's scary?" The system panel flashed before his eyes. "Her power level is enough to pull off all she just said." The system highlighted, as Ryuk silently heaved a sigh of relief. "If I had left like she asked, and she went ahead and did what she said, I would have carried the curse of billions of lost lives on my soul for being the one who brought her out in the first place. Seems like I made the right decision." "Well then, that was before, right?" he asked, and she nodded. "Yes, that's a part of what started the last war in the first place. I'll probably destroy hundreds upon hundreds of worlds and kill billions, but then it'd all just be a repeat of the past. Perhaps it's truly time to let the past go. Carve out a new future." Odette muttered under her breath as she let go of her silently squeezed hands. She could remember the past. It wasn't much different from what she had set out to do just a few seconds ago. A circle of endless destruction and blood. She was known to be the most vengeful and power-hungry Nihil there was in the universe. But all that walking that path got her was having her people and her planet destroyed, and almost getting herself killed in the end. If she embarked on that old path again, she would rake away billions like she had done before, but in the end, she would just be captured or truly killed this time. She was strong. Even right now, she knew she still wasn't at the peak of what she was in the past. Far from it even. But she also knew what power was out there in this universe. Powers that could truly erase her from existence if she crossed her boundary. Her fate of death would be certain then. So perhaps why not blaze a new path this time? A path with a meaning beyond blood and destruction. "I don't know where to start," she said out loud, turning to Ryuk. "So, I'm guessing I'll just start from somewhere that doesn't require getting fresh blood on my hands at least," she said, as Ryuk hummed under his breath. "I also want to return to Amamura and resume my life too," Ryuk thought in his head, as the image of old Jack, Mrs. Linnea, Morgaine, and even the grumpy Officer Reese flashed in his mind. "I don't plan on letting all that just whoosh into the air like nothing. But I'm also scared. Scared of bringing something that could destroy all of this along with me." Ryuk thought silently to himself. "I was previously planning on luring her to Amamura and getting her subdued by borrowing the powers of the strongest in Amamura. But now, I don't want her destroyed anymore. But still, it's too risky." "Hey!" she suddenly called out, pulling Ryuk out of his reverie. "You know," she said, as one of her hands wound around her cheek, "I can listen to your thoughts, right?" she completed, a sentence that made Ryuk pause in shock as he blurted out, "What did you just say?" I also want to return to Amamura and resume my life too. I don't plan on letting all that just whoosh into the air like nothing. But I'm also scared. Scared of bringing something that could destroy all of this along with me. I was previously planning on luring her to Amamura and getting her subdued by borrowing the powers of the strongest in Amamura. But now, I don't want her destroyed anymore. But still, it's too risky, she said, borrowing Ryuk's manner of speaking and leaving his face pale. You didn't think my drinking your blood was just to regain my energy and open a portal, did you? She asked with an evil smirk, as the hair behind Ryuk's neck rose. That was close. The system blinked as Ryuk shot back. Hey, my thoughts are my privacy. Even if you can read them, you should have requested my permission before you, he was saying, but paused when he saw her image flicker. And in the next moment, Ryuk felt the embrace from behind him. The arms wrapped around his abdomen, and hot air blew at his ears, turning them red. His heartbeat unconsciously pounded harder. In the next moment, a gasp, bordering on a moan, left his lips as he felt the fong sink into his neck. The sound of blood being sucked echoed, this time, twice as long as the first, lasting for a whole 20 seconds. She eventually pulled back and whispered into his ear, I am an evil, destructive monster, just like you fear, Ryuk. No doubt about that, she said in a seductively chilling voice. But that doesn't mean I will bring the pain to the one who was there for me when he has no reason to be. Trust me. And I, Odette Nihil, promise not to disappoint you. Phew. Finally some service. Ryuk exhaled in relief as the golden comms flashing before his face finally beeped. They were currently seated in a private spaceship with 3 seats. One forward where the pilot sat, the other 2 behind, one of which was Ryuk's and the second, none other than Odette, with her legs crossed and eyes gazing at the pilot man. It was a peculiar scene as a humorous smile was on Odette's face, looking at the back of the pilot, whose clothes were drenched in sweat, the hair behind his neck standing on end, like that of one who had been electrocuted. But he hadn't been electrocuted, but more like horrified out of his senses. A series of messages appeared right before Ryuk's face, a smile slowly blooming from his lips. According to the messages, the total duration of his quest was about a week passing in the outside world. He had received messages after message, mostly from Mrs. Linnea and Old Jack. A golden keyboard appeared before him, and he quickly typed in a simple line. It was a good thing he told them he might not be arriving back early, as even the messages he received after stating that were unbelievable. There were a couple of messages from Officer Reese, most of which were asking if he was okay, and the last of which read, Seems like you died, kid. How disheartening. I wish your good soul paradise. Damn your paradise. Ryuk cursed under his breath as he sent back a simple, I'm coming. He sent back, before continuing to scroll through his messages. He scrolled across his messages, and a dispirited expression crawled over his face after he noticed something. Out of all the people he expected would have asked if he was okay, someone was missing. Morgane. Perhaps. She still doesn't have my communication info, too. He thought silently as he looked up at the date and realized it was the 14th. Mrs. Linnea said she would come back home once in a full moon, which should be the 15th or 16th. Maybe she'll come home tomorrow and I'll get to ask her what all this being a chosen was about, and if it can't be helped, then at least exchange communication info, he thought, brightening himself up with a hopeful smile before switching off the comms. The golden comms disappeared, and Ryuk turned his head back up, to the sight of the petrified pilot and staring Odette. Hey, can you stop scaring the hell out of the pilot? You don't want him to crash us to death due to fear, do you? Ryuk asked, as Odette slowly turned her head to look at him, her grin widening. What? I'm not even allowed to stare anymore? She asked him humorously, and Ryuk rolled his eyes. Your eyes are back to purple? He noticed immediately, looking at her. Her eyes were initially purple when he had met her, but just a second into the fight, they had turned pitch black. Now it was back to purple. What? You find it familiar? She asked as she looked into his equally shimmering purple eyes. There's no need to rush, Sir Pilot. Take a deep breath and go a little slower. You're safe with us. Okay? Ryuk said, calling to the pilot man, who slowly turned his petrified neck to Ryuk and nodded. Very well, sir. We'll be in Amamura in just 30 more minutes. He added, his heart beating slower, something Ryuk could hear easing. He took a deep breath, his eyes regaining their reassuring light. The erratically flying spaceship finally slowed down, cruising instead of rushing forward blindly like it had been doing before. Oh! The silent exclamation escaped Odette's lips as her eyebrows furrowed, looking at the driver whose previously standing hair started to settle. It was a clear sign of his fear subsiding. He was able to get over the fear of my stare from those simple words? She thought, slightly bewildered. She had not really pressured the weak man, just stared at him intensely. But for one with her power level, that simple stare was comparable to a lion staring in silence at a deer. Even with no motive for attack, it was still a paralyzing stare. But now, those fears had subsided heavily from Ryuk's simple words. That was extraordinary, and it led her to a realization. He has a magical way with words, to speak directly to a being's soul and make them believe him deeply. Just like how he had deterred me from going through with my initial plan for destruction, she realized, turning to look at Ryuk, who currently had a small smile as he typed on the golden comms in front of him. What's weird is, he doesn't seem to be activating a technique or something to bring about these effects. He just says it and sounds so reassuring, she thought, looking at Ryuk a tad bit suspiciously, before she turned her gaze away to look at the world outside through the glass. How interesting, she muttered beneath her breath as she looked out the glass. Right now, they weren't alone. Just like them, hundreds of ships were flying around in these voids with a couple of planets visible in the far distance. The sound of the ship rumbling filled most of the void, but her gaze didn't just let her see them. She could see the entire world, like one who was standing 1,000,000 miles above it all and eyeing down from above. She could see every being, hear every single one of their words, and even read the thoughts of the weakest ones. From those things, she learned information about the current state of things and the worlds around faster than anyone would believe was ever possible. Just 1,000 years, and things have changed so much, Odette thought to herself. The races she heard about, the new planets, the new names. Most of them she had never heard before, and only a couple of these planets or races did she find familiar. Eventually, as they continued to move forward, she sensed a powerful aura, and her gaze shifted to see a golden world in the distant void. A golden world, quite big, flaming with golden light. Oh! The exclamation escaped her lips, a humorous smile on them as she saw the golden haloed being that held the entirety of the flaming golden world in its raised hands. Amamura, huh? Looking shabbier than I remembered. It's a base checkpoint, sir. You only need your identifier confirmed, and we'll be allowed in, the driver said from the front, as their spaceship came to a halt. I understand, Ryuk called, as the hatch opened up and he, along with the driver, stepped out. By the side where they were stopped, he could already see a fallen guard standing watch. Your IDs, please, he called out. The driver brought out a gold card, which the fallen guard took, accessing it with a beam from his finger. It made a satisfying beep before he returned it to the driver, who took it with a bow and stepped back. It gave way for Ryuk, who had light conjured in his palm, revealing his Amamura identification card. He passed it to the fallen guard, who scanned it with the same beam of light from his fingers. 3 sharp beeps rang out before the guard passed it back, a bit of respect glinting in his eyes. It was understandable, after all, he was a fallen guard and Ryuk was an archguard. I can sense you have a third person on the ship, sir? The fallen guard asked, and Ryuk casually waved it off. Just a friend, coming on a temporary visit, he replied. The fallen guard's eyebrows creased, but before he could speak, Ryuk continued. But I'm secretly planning to take her to the Amamura identification base and get her verified. I'm hoping she will get to become an archguard like me soon, he added, and light flickered in the guard's eyes as he smiled. Very well then, sir. I do wish you success in your endeavors. You're free to go in, he said. Ryuk waved him off, and the duo turned back to the spaceship, which soon resumed flying, disappearing farther down the golden skyline. It didn't take long before they finally arrived at the airport, where they landed. Ryuk transferred some funds from his ammo account to the driver, and a couple of minutes later, they were standing before a road filled with golden Ammons and fallen angels all around. Ryuk dispersed the comms before turning to Odette, but his eyebrows creased sharply. He couldn't help but notice she had somehow become the center of attention right now, and for good reason. Odette truly seemed out of place. Even though she was clad in a dark robe, it did little to hide her strangeness. Her purple-colored skin was the first thing drawing every eye. Even among foreigners, there weren't many races with purple skin. And secondly, she was wearing a dark crown on her head, with sharp, pointed edges, and it didn't look like some silly costume piece either. Her crown oozed with a strange, ancient majesty and a menacing aura that was more than apparent to the majority of passing Fallens. While, due to their lower cultivation, they really couldn't feel how menacing the aura from her crown truly was. It still drew that attention to it. She didn't seem bothered by it, though. If anything, she even held her grin wider, clearly enjoying the attention. And attention was one of the things Ryuk hated the most. He quickly waved down an Ammonius driver, and they soon took to the skies, finally gaining some bit of privacy. Pretty sure you know you're drawing quite the attention, right? Ryuk asked with worried eyes as he looked at Odette, who turned a raised eyebrow at him. What? Now I can't even exist? She asked with an evil smirk. Ryuk slowly turned his head to the crown. That was the real attention grabber, and he could bet his life she knew that. As if hearing his thoughts, her hands moved up to the crown and gripped it hard. Veins bulged on her arms as she struggled to remove it, but Ryuk noticed. Even with more veins popping from her hands, a sign of her exerting more strength, the crown stayed firmly in place, completely unmoved. It can't be taken off? He asked in disbelief as she let go of it. Yes, she replied curtly, and he clapped his forehead. Walking around with a purple-skinned lady in a cursed-looking crown. Especially the crown. Even the weaker fallen angels could feel the strange pressure. If any archguard laid eyes on her, they'd be horrified and most likely try to stop them immediately. This might be more headache-inducing than I thought, Ryuk groaned inwardly, but sulking wouldn't help here. He could only make necessary actions, and that included bringing out his comms and beginning to type. I can't bring you to my house, he said aloud. And why is that? She asked, her grin dimming. So, we'll have to rent a mini apartment until we figure out the next step. He continued, before his eyes flashed when he saw something that grabbed his attention on his comms. He dragged the holographic display towards her. What do you think of this house? Ryuk asked, as Odette stretched a finger, flipping through the building layout and rooms. Nice, no? Ryuk replied. Course it was nice. It was a scenic building going for 200,000 ammo pins per month. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Odette laughed. A sudden, bizarre laugh that drew both Ryuk's and the Ammonius driver's attention. You're a clumsy one, Ryuk, she said, and Ryuk raised an eyebrow at her next words. Do you need to pay for the Ammonius too? She asked, and he got the signal. He signaled for the driver to lower them and paid up as normal, but all that he got from Odette was an amused head shake. What? It's just basic protocol, he said after the Ammonius driver disappeared into the air. Basic protocol, huh? Odette asked with an unamused head tilt, before her eyes quickly paused on a building. A building seemingly beyond this part of the world. Some extravagant ultra-large mansion that anyone could guess probably belonged to a stinkingly rich, affluent angel. Tell me, Ryuk, don't you think that house is nice? She asked seriously. It is very nice. Why? He asked, but then watched her eyes light up with desire. No, Odette, that isn't for rent, and we can't afford it even if it is. He was saying when he felt the abrupt grab on his shoulders and then, the air flapped wildly against Ryuk's face, and his eyes widened when he found himself dangling in the air. Right now, they were standing 300 meters above the ultra-large mansion he had just complimented. "Hey, we're not allowed to be in a building's airspace without permission," he whispered, his face turning pale, when he felt the powerful presence that was quickly approaching them. But Odette grinned instead. "How about I teach you a small lesson, Ryuk?" Barely 5 seconds after they appeared in the airspace, Ryuk's fear came true. Immediately, they were surrounded by 5 uniformed, muscular-looking angels, who had them encircled in a tight formation. "You have come into the vicinity of the Mundus Mansion without exclusive invitation, and hence warrant being arrested, under the 4th Amendment of the Amamoran Home Privacy Law. Please save yourself the trouble and do not resist," one of the guards shouted out loud, as they each took a single step forward toward them. "Ha! Ha ha!" Ryuk called out nervously, waving quickly. "I can assure you all, this is all just a mista." He was still saying when blood splashed right onto Ryuk's head, half his body instantly drenched in the golden liquid. "Huh!" he exclaimed in confusion, turning his gaze upwards, and there he found it. Right above Ryuk's head was a body that was none other than one of the guards surrounding them. He was frozen mid-swing, his elongated eagle-like golden claws grabbing at Ryuk's skull. But the claws never reached him, as right out from the guard's neck, a dark claw had torn through, covered in his golden blood, which was the source of the golden blood that had splattered onto Ryuk. He paused in disbelief, stupefied at how this had happened in less than a second, and even the entire world paused in silence like him, too. But a sound soon snapped them all back to reality. Golden blood sprayed out from the guard's mouth as his body was raised by Odette's claws and casually thrown to the ground like an annoying fly. There was no need for more words, as all hell broke loose right after. Boom! Golden pillars of energy burst through the entire airspace as the remaining 4 guards flashed with speed toward Odette, whose grin widened until it reached her ears. "Finally, some action," she said, both arms outstretched by her side as she threw her head back, her eyes glinting. Beams of attacks, weapons, and arts blasted toward her from all sides. But she never moved an inch, opening her arms as if to welcome every assault. And in the very next moment it collided. Kaboom! A powerful mushroom of energy exploded straight into the sky, drowning the unlucky Ryuk in its tempest. It soon cleared, revealing only a single figure. None other than Ryuk, who was currently coughing out his lungs, with a couple of cuts visible on his skin. But the guards' eyes narrowed in confusion and alertness. Their target was never the young man. He was just the unlucky stray. But the one they had targeted was nowhere to be found. "Looking for me?" The words resounded above, and they all instantly turned upward. There, they found a figure lying horizontally in the air, both hands crossed behind her head as she hovered, like someone casually sleeping on a bed. "How?" The gasp escaped their lips, but they reacted instantly, another wave of attacks blasting forth toward her. Yet, blood burst from the lips of one of the guards. He looked down at himself to see that the right side of his chest had a gruesome hole, where a dark claw was dangling out, his golden blood dripping down from it. "TCH die!" he shouted, ignoring his pain, and slashing his second claw toward Odette's head. Blood splashed into the air as an arm went flying into the sky. Boom! Shockwaves exploded in a circular wave as a punch slammed into the guard's face, sending him crashing into the ground and vanishing into the abyssal crater. Now only 3 remained. Wings tore out from behind them as they became phantoms of light, moving with terrifying speed. But even with all their light speed and terrifying energy waves, before the grinning Odette, they all fell one by one, in seconds. Their modes of defeat were all the same, Odette's claws ripping through their bodies and tearing out the other side. When she was done with the last of them, she appeared right behind Ryuk, her back to him. And once more, her hand stretched out, grabbing at his shoulder. Less than a millisecond, and space wrapped around where they both stood, and they disappeared. All Ryuk felt was the world rapidly zooming by, and in the next moment, he was standing right on top of one of the open spaces of the mansion, where 2 men currently stood. One of them was another guard, but this one stood at a shocking height of 5 meters, dressed in a golden uniform. Though with a leaner physique, his body radiated pure brute strength, the entire space seemingly compressed by the weight of his existence alone. But he stood obediently behind someone else, an old man with a long white beard and hair that gently flailed to the breeze. Odette's eyes locked on the man, and she spoke. "Did you previously own this place?" she asked, her tone deadpan. "Previously own?" Ryuk thought in his head. Surprisingly, the old man replied, "I'm Tori Mundus, miss. And yes, the entirety of the building is in my name," he said. Odette nodded. "Good. Now I'm the new owner of the building." "What?" Ryuk screamed out, but it didn't stop Odette. "Tell everyone they have 30 minutes to evacuate, or they can just remain in here forever," she said casually, before turning her head and looking at a crater where one of the guards was slowly dragging himself out. "Also, fix up those floor damages before leaving," she added, walking right past both the old man and the golden-clad guard. Naturally, the guard moved when Odette reached his side. He raised up his head, his firm hands, turning to monstrous golden claws, and then, boom! Successive shockwaves rippled through the air as his hand slammed down on Odette's shoulder. The sound of something being ripped rang out, and a moment later, a hand silently fell onto the ground, belonging to none other than the fearsome-looking guard. Golden blood splashed down like rain, and Ryuk, the old man, and even the golden-uniformed guard all had their eyes widened in shock. Odette paused afterward, turning to look at the old man. He took in a deep inhale, settling his shock, before replying with his usual smile. 30 minutes it is." He then turned to the guard. "Yuito, repair the cracks in the garden and signal for all the workers to leave in 10 minutes. Then get the jet, and let's depart." He gave absolute cooperation to Odette's words. Just 15 minutes later, the entire building had been evacuated. The guards, the cleaners, the chefs, the gardeners. There was not a single soul left in the mighty Mundus mansion, except for 2 people. One who sat so casually on one of the mansion's open spaces, legs swinging around, as they looked at the garden below, and the other, still reeling in shock, eyes locked onto the departing jet. "Nice, no?" Odette asked as she turned to look at Ryuk, noting his stupefied expression. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. She shrugged casually. "Got myself a new place? That? You threatened an old man and kicked him out of his own house," he said, seemingly finally catching up with the state of things. She nodded 3 times, not missing a beat, before asking, "So, what's wrong with her?" Ryuk thought, bizarrely staring at Odette, who didn't seem to recognize that she had done something wrong. "Are you okay, Ryuk? You look like you just saw a ghost," she added, amused by his paling face. He eventually inhaled deeply and exhaled with a sharp sigh. "We need to get out of here." Why?" Odette asked, puzzled. "1, we don't own this. You just snatched it from a poor old man because you have the power to do so. And what's wrong with that?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in mock innocence. "Everything is wrong with that," he snapped. "And secondly, give it an hour, and this whole mansion will be surrounded. A man like that wouldn't just give up his hard-earned mansion to a thief, or shrink back from a threat. Even worse, a mission to repossess this place might be posted on the Amamura Loyalty Quest board, and you'll have archguards flooding in to rip your head off. Hence," he added, climbing up the edge of the rooftop, "we need to leave." But before he could jump down, her hand grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back up. He found himself staring into her glowing purple eyes, now furrowed with a hint of thoughtfulness and suspicion. "You're not from Amamura," she said with a certainty that surprised him. Ryuk hesitated for a second but shrugged it off. "Okay, so, what's that got to do with us leaving?" he said, yanking off his shoulder and preparing to jump again, only for her to grab him once more and drag him back. "Listen to your first lesson, Ryuk," Odette said, turning his face towards the distant open road. "Look at them," she said, pointing out the bustling crowd. "Men, women, fallen angels, half-angels, Lorax races, Idiono beings. Different, aren't they all?" she asked. Ryuk hummed silently, even a bit surprised. How does she even know all of that? "We've barely been here a few minutes," he wondered. "Yes," he answered. "You know the single thing that unites all of them?" she asked rhetorically, answering. "Rules. They all follow rules." "Huh. They walk up to an Ammonius and pay for the ride, live in a rented apartment, and go about their lives working under someone, maybe a boss, maybe a guildmaster. To them, they're doing this because they have daughters, sons, family members they need to feed or protect. It could also be that they're simply trying to earn the approval of someone important to them. These people, Ryuk, they form the basic foundation of a world structure. What most call the honest hierarchy. Whatever reasons they may have for living like this, there is one single important truth that cannot be denied," she said, turning to look back at him. "And that is, they are all weak," she said as a matter-of-factly. "They live within the rules because the rules guide and protect them. So long as they obey and don't transgress, they're mostly safe," she explained. Though Ryuk still didn't fully grasp what she meant with such a sudden explanation. "Has it ever occurred to you at all to ask who made these rules, and whether those people actually follow them?" she continued. Ryuk shrugged off her hand, frowning as he replied, "Yes, I have. They were made by the angels who wanted order in Amamura. When there is order, there is peace and hence prosperity, which is exactly why they must be followed." "Maybe," Odette said with a deadpan expression as her eyes trailed back to the crowd. "These weaklings didn't make it, did they?" she asked with a grin that unsettled Ryuk. "What are you even saying? One inevitable truth is that the rules are made by the strong. And only a foolish man will make something that binds himself. The strong live in what is referred to as the true hierarchy. The honest hierarchy is made up of pathetic beings who need rules and laws to protect them, because they can't protect themselves. They're all cripples, leaning on the law, and hence the strong, just to survive," she said before turning back at him. "So, there are two sides, Ryuk. The honest hierarchy, and the true hierarchy. Any being is free to choose which one to live in. You," she continued, "seem to have chosen the honest hierarchy as your home. But I have chosen the true hierarchy." She said it like a simple fact, but to Ryuk it sounded completely ridiculous. "Apart from the fact that you're risking a lot and sure to get into big trouble," Ryuk said, bringing her back to reality. "There's nothing true about taking someone's home by force. Tisk, please. You think a sly old man like that only has one mansion?" Odette asked with an eye roll. But Ryuk wasn't deterred. "Even if he does own 10 more, what about the guards? The workers? The chefs? The gardeners? When you took over and kicked everyone out, they all lost their jobs and their income, which aided in their survival. You caused nothing but pain with your little power stunt. And you call that living in the true hierarchy?" Odette hummed quietly, eyes narrowing slightly before she replied. "You don't understand." "I do understand, Odette," Ryuk said sharply. "You're trying to say that with enough power, the world can be taken for yourself. You're saying that if I'm strong enough, I can lay my eyes on a beautiful mansion and just take it, because no one can stop me. And that those with such power live in a different hierarchy. You're saying strength is all that matters, and rules don't apply to the strong, if anything made by them." "Oh," Odette raised an eyebrow at his summary. Truly, it was exactly what she'd been trying to say. "And you know what?" Ryuk said after a moment, his voice quieter now. "You're actually right.